Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a closer look at listener-requested topics. Today we're diving into something pretty interesting, the intersection of autism and menopause. We've got this super insightful blog post from Cheap ABA titled Autism and Menopause, a guide for autistic women navigating the change. I think it'll give us some really valuable insights into how these two experiences can kind of intertwine.
Yeah, it's a topic that deserves a lot more attention, so
Hmm.
I'm really glad we're taking the time to do this deep dive and explore, how a major biological transition like menopause can impact women who are also on the autism spectrum.
Totally. And I think it's important to remember that, autism presents differently in everyone. So we're talking about a really diverse group of experiences here.
Right, exactly. No two individuals experience autism the same way. And then when you add in menopause, which is this huge shift with, all these hormonal changes, it's a whole nother layer of complexity.
Yeah. And speaking of menopause, just to make sure we're all on the same page, can we maybe do a quick recap of what exactly that is?
Of course. So menopause is basically the natural biological process that marks the end of a woman's reproductive years. It's driven by these hormonal shifts and can impact a woman's physical and emotional well-being pretty significantly. What's fascinating about this blog post is that it really highlights how these impacts can be uniquely experienced by autistic women.
Yeah, I was really drawn to that aspect of it too. Like, how does menopause play out differently for someone on the autism spectrum? And one of the first things the blog post dives into is sensory sensitivities.
Right, and sensory sensitivities are basically when certain sights, sounds, smells, tastes, textures feel overwhelming or even painful. So you can imagine how those sensitivities might be heightened during menopause.
So it's not just like adapting to the normal changes in menopause, but also dealing with these potentially like magnified sensitivities.
Exactly. It's like turning up the volume on an already sensitive system. The blog post uses the example of hot flashes, which are those sudden intense feelings of heat. And for someone who's already sensitive to temperature changes, you can imagine how overwhelming that feeling can be.
Wow, yeah, that makes total sense. And it's not just the sensory stuff either. The blog post also talks about executive functioning skills being impacted during menopause. Can you explain a little bit about what executive function means?
Sure. So executive function is basically the brain's control center. It's responsible for things like planning, organization, time management, even emotional regulation. Think of it as all those mental processes that help us stay focused, manage our time, make decisions effectively.
Okay, so if someone already has some difficulty with executive function due to autism, menopause could make those challenges even more pronounced.
Right. The hormonal fluctuations can affect anyone's cognitive function. But for an autistic woman who might already struggle with, let's say, staying organized or sticking to a routine, those hormonal shifts of menopause can really amplify those challenges.
So it's kind of like a double whammy in a way.
Yeah, it can be incredibly taxing.
And then on top of all that, the physical and the cognitive changes, there's also the potential for increased social anxiety and feelings of isolation during menopause.
Absolutely. And I think this is where understanding the social and emotional aspects of autism becomes so important. Many autistic individuals already find social interactions challenging, and then menopause comes along with these hormonal changes that can affect mood and potentially heighten anxiety in social situations. Plus, feeling isolated is already a common experience during menopause for a lot of women. So if you add in pre-existing social challenges, it's easy to see why autistic women might feel even more withdrawn during this time.
It really paints a picture of all these unique challenges. But what I appreciate about this blog post is that it doesn't just leave us there. It also offers some really practical advice and strategies for navigating these challenges.
And that's what we'll be talking about next.
Exactly. Stay tuned.
So we've been talking about the unique challenges that autistic women can face during menopause.
Yeah, and it's definitely a lot to process.
It is.
Yeah.
But the good news is that there are a lot of strategies and tools that can help.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Well, the blog post breaks it down into a few key areas, and
Wow.
I think one of the most important is self-advocacy. It's about being able to effectively communicate your needs and preferences.
And I'm guessing that's especially important when it comes to healthcare.
Absolutely. The blog post really emphasizes the importance of open communication with your healthcare providers.
Like being honest about your symptoms and how they're affecting you.
Exactly. It's not just about mentioning your symptoms, though. It's also about letting your doctor know about your autistic traits and how they might be intersecting with your menopause experience.
Oh, I see. So it's about giving them the full picture.
Right, because that allows for a more collaborative approach to developing a care plan that really meets your individual needs.
That makes a lot of sense. Like if you're sensitive to certain medications or supplements, your doctor needs to know that.
Exactly. It's like having this double layer of complexity, right? You're dealing with the potential sensitivities related to autism and the hormonal shifts of menopause. So personalized care is absolutely crucial.
It really highlights how important it is to find a doctor who understands both autism and menopause.
And who's willing to listen to you and work with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so self-advocacy is key. What else does the blog post recommend?
Well, another big one is tracking your symptoms.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that for menopause in general. But I'm guessing it's even more important for autistic women.
It can be super helpful, whether you use a journal, a calendar, an app. Just taking the time to note down your physical and emotional changes can really help you identify patterns and triggers.
So it's about like noticing trends over time.
Right. And it can give you a sense of control because you start to anticipate those more challenging days. For example, if you notice that your anxiety tends to spike during certain times of the month, you can proactively plan for those days and put some self-care strategies in place.
That's a really good point. It's like you're not just at the mercy of your symptoms anymore.
Exactly. You're taking charge of your well-being.
Okay, so we've got self-advocacy, we've got tracking symptoms. What about self-care? Does the blog post talk about that?
It does, and it's a big one. But it's not just about, bubble baths and face masks. It's about actively engaging in activities that replenish your energy, reduce stress, and bring you joy.
So it's about finding what works for you and making it a priority.
Exactly. For some people, it might be yoga meditation, spending time in nature. For others, it might be listening to music, pursuing creative hobbies, or engaging in sensory activities that bring comfort. The key is to find what works for you and make it a non-negotiable part of your routine.
I love that. It's about tuning into what your body and mind need. And speaking of tuning in, the blog post also talks about creating a sensory-friendly environment. What are some examples of what that might look like?
Sure, it can be as simple as dimming the lights, minimizing noise levels, making sure the temperature is comfortable, even choosing clothing fabrics that feel good against your skin. If you're sensitive to strong smells, using unscented products can make a big difference. It's all about minimizing sensory overload, which can be especially important during menopause when those sensitivities might be heightened.
So it's about being proactive and taking control of your surroundings.
Exactly. And then there's another area that I think is really exciting, assistive technology.
Oh yeah, that's something that really caught my eye when I was reading the blog post. I hadn't really considered how technology could be used to help manage some of the challenges of menopause.
There's so much potential there. Think about apps for reminders, scheduling, organizing tasks. There are even apps specifically designed to help manage menopause symptoms like tracking hot flashes or mood swings.
It's amazing.
It is. And for autistic women who might be struggling with executive function, these tools can be game changers.
It's like having a personal assistant in your pocket.
Exactly. And the beauty of assistive technology is that it can be customized to your individual needs. You can choose the tools that work best for you and create a system that supports your well-being.
So it's about finding what works for you and making it work for you.
Exactly. And there's a lot out there, so don't be afraid to experiment and see what helps.
I think that's great advice for anyone going through menopause, really.
It is, but it's especially important for autistic women who might be facing those unique challenges.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Self-advocacy, tracking symptoms, self-care, sensory-friendly environments, assistive technology. Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up?
Well, the blog post also goes into some other aspects of health that can intersect with both autism and menopause. Things like medication interactions, the impact of environmental toxins, even the experience of pregnancy and childbirth.
Wow, it's like each stage of a woman's life brings its own set of considerations when you factor in autism.
It does, and it really reinforces the importance of personalized healthcare.
Okay, so we're going to have to dive into all that in our next segment.
We are, and I think it's going to be really eye-opening.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into some of those other health aspects that can intersect with both autism and menopause.
Yeah, let's get into it. The blog post specifically mentions postpartum depression.
Okay, I've heard of postpartum depression, but I'm not really sure what it is.
Well, it's a type of depression that can happen after childbirth, and it can affect any woman, but for autistic women. The challenges of adjusting to motherhood, coupled with the hormonal changes and potential sleep disruptions, can really increase the risk and intensity of postpartum depression.
Oh, wow, that makes sense. I mean, it's already such a huge adjustment to become a parent.
Right.
And then you add in the hormonal shifts and the sleep deprivation, and yeah, it sounds really tough.
It can be. And for autistic women who might already have some sensitivities around sensory input or social interaction, those challenges can become even more pronounced during the postpartum period.
So it's like everything's just amplified.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have a strong support network in place. Whether it's family, friends, or healthcare professionals, having people who understand what you're going through can make a world of difference.
I bet. And it's not just about postpartum depression either, right? The blog post also mentions a link between autism and menstruation,
Right. And this goes back to those sensory sensitivities we were talking about earlier.
like the cramps and the bloating and the mood swings.
Exactly. Autistic women might experience those things more intensely because of their heightened sensitivity to sensory input. And then during the perimenopausal period, when hormone levels are fluctuating more erratically, those sensitivities can become even more pronounced.
So it's like another layer of complexity on top of everything else.
It is, and it's important to remember that not every autistic woman will experience these things in the same way. Some might have very mild symptoms, while others might have more severe symptoms.
So it's all about individual variation.
Exactly. And it's also important to note that autism can affect the experience of pain. Some autistic individuals might be hypersensitive to pain, while others might be hyposensitive. And when you consider that menopause can bring its own aches and pains, like joint stiffness or muscle soreness, it's crucial to understand how these factors might interact.
So it's like a whole puzzle that needs to be pieced together.
Right. And speaking of puzzles, the blog post also touches on the link between autism and certain genetic syndromes.
Oh, interesting. Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Conditions like Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome and Miller-Dieter syndrome, among others, can sometimes be linked to autism. It's a reminder that autism exists on a spectrum, and for some individuals, it can be part of a broader genetic picture.
That's a really important point. It shows just how diverse the autistic community is.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole interplay of genetics and environment. We know that autism has a strong genetic component, but environmental factors also play a role. And when you consider that hormonal changes during menopause can influence gene expression, it becomes even more complex.
Wow, it really makes you realize how much we still don't know about the human body.
It does. But even with what we do know, we can empower autistic women to navigate menopause with greater awareness and support.
So what would you say are some of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that menopause is not a one-size-fits-all experience. If you're an autistic woman approaching this stage of life, or if you're supporting someone who is, remember that there are resources available and you're not alone. This blog post we've been discussing is a fantastic starting point, and I encourage you to explore the additional resources it mentions.
I agree. It's been such an eye-opening conversation, and I'm so grateful to the listener who requested this topic.
Me too. It's been a pleasure delving into this subject with you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and feel empowered to navigate this unique intersection of autism and menopause with confidence and support. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those important questions.